The Teachings of the Death Defier. Nagualism Beyond Don Juan. Chapter 3. Uchu meets Guadalupe. I wiped the sweat off my forehead with the back of my hands as I sat in the jeep as we drove through the villages. It had been 4 hours since we left the airport. I had gotten tired of asking when we would arrive. I just settled in and hoped it will be soon. My butts were already hurt sore as I felt the itch on every side as I sat. I took a look at the map on my hands, unfolding it and spreading it across the dashboard. Fernando looked at me and laughed. I bothered not respond as I gazed at the map and back at the road, trying to figure where we were at the moment. It was pointless as all I could see was a bunch of similarly houses and trees that stretched on for miles. "You are not going to find your way through a map, my friend," he said, keeping his focus on the road as he smiled. "Why then was I handed a map at the airport?" I replied, pulling out my journal and the pamphlet that had the Atitlan Lake on the front page. Such a beauty. It was my dream to bring forth the unheard stories from around the world. I had heard about the Lake Atitlan and the powers it was believed to possess, and to how much esteem the villages around upheld its presence. My curiosity had been sparked and I had made it a goal to write on the wonder of Atitlan. "Well, if the map was okay, then you wouldn't need a guide like me," he replied my question with a sense of pride, as I gazed at his sweaty forehead as the beads of sweat trailed to his bushy brows and got stuck. "Well, I guess you are right then." I folded the map and shoved it back into my rucksack. "I wouldn't be needing you anymore," I thought in my head. The jeep galloped through the villages as we now passed fewer houses and the sun slowly hid behind the clouds, which gave me much relief. "We are here," Fernando said, pulling up by a one-story building with washed-up white paints on the outside, and just above the red-painted wooden door, there was an inscription, "The Best Hotel." As I thought to myself, this had better be worth it. I step down after him as he goes around back to get the rest of my luggage. I stare up at the evening sky as the setting sun has turned it orange, as the darkening mountains stood as a perfect horizon for its exit. "Holla," I said, as their smiling faces welcomed us into what seemed to be the reception, which was a single brown table and 2 chairs on opposite sides. One for the dark-haired woman, presumably in her 40s, who was the receptionist, and the other for whatever guest she was attending to. The inside was worse than the outside, with the walls terribly washed off, and the only incandescent lighting that hung over our heads flickering with the blow of every wind. I walked to the picture that hung in the nearby lobby, leaving them to finalize my check-in so I could finally rest, and it was yet again the Atitlan Lake. This time it was hand-painted and at night, as the reflection of the moon looked almost too real. Ricardo Oscar Martinez, 1860. He had walked down to the river when he lost his family in a fire accident in his home just uptown. He had thought to drown himself that night as he sat by the shore and wept his soul out, but ended up returning to the scene. Every night for 2 weeks, he would walk down to the river and cry his burdens away. It was one of these nights he made this painting, and ever since then he never went back there. "Wow," I said, and took a closer look at the frame. "The original painting stays at the museum in Guatemala City, and so does Ricardo," he said. I smiled and briefly scribbled in my journal. "Are you seriously writing everything I say?" he asked as he moved ahead down the lobby with the luggage. "Well, if you keep speaking profound and insightful words, I'd probably write a book about tourist guides in Atitlan, Guatemala. Fernando, a case study." "I would really like that," he teased, and walked on as we laughed over the moment. The room gave off a damp, stuffy smell as we walked in. I coughed and immediately I turned on the light switch and pushed open the wooden windows for ventilation. "So much for comfort," I said as I sat in the unresponsive bed that stayed stiff even under my weight. I was too tired to be bothered about comfort. More so, I wasn't here for that. Else's have stayed in the much luxurious Guatemala City with the fancy hotels and neighborhood and read everything I needed in the libraries, but no, I wanted the first-hand experience, I wanted realness, I sought nothing but the truth. Those were the exact words with which I ended my day's journal, as Fernando left saying he'd be back tomorrow morning so we can officially make our trip to the infamous Atitlan Lake, and I shut my eyes and let myself fall asleep. I woke up to birds rustling their feathers by my window. 2 pigeons sat with buried heads in their wings picking out, only them knew what. I got out of bed and went into the bathroom. As with the rest of the hotel, it wasn't fancy but they had running water, which was a real miracle. The rusted shower head hung above as it worked in intermittent squirts. So much for running water, I sigh, struggling to get the soap off of my eyes. "Good morning, senor," it was Fernando's voice from behind the door. He was quite the active man for his age, which seemed to close to 60 when he didn't have his cap on, with his greying hair that already had a bald patch at the back of his head. "Good morning," I replied as we both walked out of the room. "Breakfast?" he asked. It was just then my stomach rumbled and I realized I didn't have dinner before falling asleep. "Yes, breakfast," I replied. "This way then," he said as we walked past his Jeep in the parking lot and across the road, as we made our way past children chasing each other and girls seated braiding each other's hairs. Fernando, with a grave voice, said, "You see, the river has been rumored to possess so many abilities, and the most prominent one amongst the people here is that it's the home to their goddess. The one believed to have specially birthed the people of this village and had endowed them with so much life they lived for generations to generations in total health. So much so that they became popular for their practice in divinity in regards to health, that whenever people did fall sick, all they need do was step foot in Atitlan and be healed in a few days, while in cases of serious ailments their healer had to be summoned in person, and it required certain extra sacrifices." He leaned in closer, looking around as though to be certain no one was listening, and he whispered, "Human sacrifices," and leaned back into his chair. I was taken aback as my mouth dropped in shock, then he began to laugh hysterically, rocking his head back as he held his stomach tightly. I scoffed to shake off the thought as I watched the young girl set our meal before us. "I'm just kidding," he finally said, "although the priest is real, no human sacrifices are needed. Just a couple herbs and prayers to the goddess and they'd be fine." "Did everyone who came go back healed?" I asked, dipping my spoon into the turkey soup, locally called kakik. And I had written that at the corner of my journal so it didn't interfere with the main report. "Well, not everyone, for some she allows them to transcend to the spirit," he shrugged, not certain of the fact but most likely from what he had been told by folklore. "So, where does this healer stay?" My mouth filled with a burst of flavors and spice all embedded in the turkey soup. "No one knows exactly, but it's somewhere by the river," he said again with that dark mysterious voice, and I felt a weight in my heart, until he laughed again. "What is it this time?" I say with a smug look. "You really need to see your face when you are scared," he said, laughing. I return my gaze to my notepad and jot how much unusual my tour guide was. I didn't want to forget the details in a hurry. It'll make a good twist while reading as much as it was doing right now. "So the healer stays where?" I asked. "He has a house just past the cascade," he said, "where he lives with all his students. You can call it the School of Divinity if you wish, as some do, but it's where he lives." "Do I get to visit it?" I asked. "Sure, we just need to inflict you with a chronic stroke so we get to summon the healer," he said, and I laughed, not intending to fall for his jokes again, but this time, his face held its stern approval of his words and I felt weakened. "You're joking, right?" I asked, still unsure. "Yes, absolutely," he said, laughing. "You really need to keep up, Pablo." He stood up and I followed, feeling played yet again. We drove steadily in the heat of the day as I peered outside through the window and watched as the houses completely disappeared and we were left with nothing but trees. We pulled up finally and Fernando turned to me. "Here's the part we have to go on foot," he said, and turned off his ignition. He let his sunglasses hang on his neck as he led the way into the forest, and under the cool canopy of the trees, as I was happy to be free from the scorching December sun. We had walked a few minutes when I began to see it ahead and a queer feeling of excitement overwhelmed me. I couldn't wait to behold the beauty I had longed for. We hurried out of the tree covers and onto much even ground with low-lying grass and wet sand much closer to the edge of the lake. It was paradise. The clear blue water a perfect reflection of the sky above as the lake sat borders by 3 peaks. The still water stretched a large expanse as I stood in awe. No book could have captured such beauty in black and white imagery, I thought as I flashed back to the image in front of the pamphlet. Ricardo's painting did more justice to the scenery than 1,000 words. The elements of color wonderful captured. I walked to the brink of the river as I felt it call my name. The wind howling, Pablo, Pablo. I turned around and found Fernando picking a stone and throwing it as it skipped on the water about 4 times, and he yelled, "Yes!" and turned to me. "It usually sinks at 3, he said, referring to the stone. Again I heard the wind whisper, "Pablo." This time it felt to come from within, as I turned back to the lake and stared intensely. "Hey Fernando, did you call me?" I asked. "No, I didn't, but I kind of need your help now." He was looking up at a tree as I walked closer to him. "Can you reach that for me?" he asked, pointing to a bunch of wild berries. "You are supposed to be the tour guide. Well, you are much taller and younger. It'll be easier for you to reach." I agreed and stepped on a log. Holding a branch I struck the berries and they fell to the ground. "Oh, thank you," he leapt as I came down from the log. I held out the berries to him when I felt a sting on my left arm. I turned to find a spider that had crawled onto my hand as I held on to the branch. I flung it away in painful reflex as it scurried under the low bushes. I looked to Fernando, who had dread written all over his face as he searched his sling bag frantically. He pulled out a syringe and held my arm firmly. "Stay still," he said, and immediately stuck the needle into the reddish rash that had formed from the bite. I felt a pump of pain as my head went black and my sight blurred. I fell to the ground, dizzied. His distant call echoed in my head as I had flashes of visions, him lifting me up and supporting me by my as he hurried through the bushes and then into his car before I finally blacked out. I find myself back at the lake, but at night. The moon in full strength illuminated so brightly that the insects crawling on the floor could be seen. The voice in the wind came again, "Pablo," but this time it came with a sign as the center of the lake began to ripple. Large floating bubbles appeared on the surface, as steam rose out of the water as though a stove had been lit under. My palms went sweaty as I tried to retreat, but my feet were stuck. I looked down to find twigs wrapped around my ankles. Then immediately with a loud roar, out of the water rose a mighty figure with grey skin and black hair. I fell back in fright and the pain in my head was unbearable. "Ouch," I said as a migraine strained even my eyes and I pushed the temple of my head as I tried to hold back the pain. "Quiet, stay still," a voice came and I turned in its direction to find an elderly man dressed in a white cloth wrapped around his chest and then over one shoulder. "Where am I?" I immediately asked, trying to seat up. "You are safe," he replied, stirring a pot over an open flame as the entire room beamed heat and smelled of a strange essence, as I saw our bodies glistening with sweat. "Fernando," I yelled, as my memories returned gradually. "He's gone today, he'd been back tomorrow, like he had been doing for the past 9 days. 9 days? I exclaimed in utter surprise. "Relax, everything will be clear soon. But first you have to rest some more. Have some water," he said, holding a gourd to me. I grabbed it and hurriedly drank its content. Perspiring, I put it down and felt my eyelids go heavy, as I lay down and shut my eyes. I awake to the sunlight that had filtered through the curtain and hit my eyes. I slowly blink open and he walks in, the same man dressed in white. "I know you have questions," he said, "a lot I'm sure, and I would love to answer it all, but not yet. First, what you need is a bath and proper food." I nod in acceptance of his hospitality, though still with piqued suspicions. "Guadalupe," he called, and a young woman walked into the room and I froze at her sight. She lifted her eyes to meet mine after she made a bow to the man, and smiled warmly as I felt my heart melt and drip down to my toes. She was beautiful. Her brown skin as smooth as chocolate, her dark eyes held fire untold, her lips so full, and her impeccable teeth shone not even as bright as her smile. She had pulled her black curly hair into a ponytail, and it only helped accentuate her features. "Take our guest to the bathroom and please get him new clothes to change into," the old man said. "Yes, maestro," she responded with another bow. He walked up to me and tapped my shoulder. "Not to worry, you are in good hands," he said, and took his leave. "Come with me," she said, and walked outside the room and waited for me to emerge. I couldn't take my eyes off her as she walked ahead of me, and we walked the long hallway till we got to a double door as she pushed one side open. "You really shouldn't stare that much. Your clothes will be left on your bed, we'd come to get you for lunch as soon as you are ready," she said gently. I shyly walked into the bathroom and there's a large and running water. It's way better than what they had in the hotel. I snapped the hotel, I said audibly to myself as I came to a realization. I had come here for a purpose and here I was totally oblivious to that fact. I clean up in haste and hurry to get dressed. If I was ever to make sense of everything and get back on track, I had better hurry up. I pulled on the poncho-like dress like everyone else I have set eyes on in the building. A colorful Mayan tunic. There was a knock by my door and there she was again, Guadalupe. "Are you ready?" she asked, and I nodded in response. She turned around, leading the way to a larger room where a group of other people of about the same age as she was, with a few being distinctively older. They sat in smaller groups around low tables with food before them, all seated on mats with legs crossed. "This way," she said, and pointed that I seat by the old man who had welcomed me. I took a seat beside him as he smiled at me before the entire gathering, and she, Guadalupe, sat on his other side. "To the Goddess Supreme, we offer ourselves in gratitude for bringing on yet another meal for our bodies," he said. And the entire room echoed, "Praises to the Goddess." "Let's eat," he said, and as though in choreographed fashion, all began eating. I ate like a starved man. Lunch was done in minutes and each person cleared his or her plate and left on their accord. I had been done for a while, but I sat there until she nudged me with her feet, and signaled that I come along. I stood to my feet, picked, cleared my table and followed her. We walked straight into the kitchen as she dipped our plates in soap water and washed them clean as the sun had begun setting. They all stood up and bowed in sync as he stood before them and bowed in response. "Blessings be unto you all this evening." "Blessings unto you, maestro," they echoed. The past few days has caused quite the stir. I know many of you would have a lot of questions for our guest, and I'm sure he in turn has questions for us, am I right? He said, looking in my direction. "Yes," I replied. Guadalupe poked my side, signaling my response wasn't appropriate. "Yes, you are right," I said further, and there was mumbling and hushed laughter from the rest. Some from behind whispered, "Maestro," and I clicked. "Yes, you are right, maestro. And I know you'd want your questions answered in haste." "Yes, maestro. That would definitely happen. But come, Fernando awaits," he said, and stood up, as did Guadalupe as she replaced him in front, and I went in with him. I met Fernando pacing in my room as I walked in. "Thank the gods you are alive, you had me worried after the incident at the lake." "What incident?" I asked. "You still don't remember?" "Carlos said it'll take a while, he said you'd still think of it as a dream." "Fernando, what are you on about?" I asked, holding him to stop his fidgeting. "You'd have to ask him to explain it all, just trust me and trust him. I have to go now, you'd be fine." I stood there in utter confusion as he left without another word. I went after him and was met by the maestro in the hallway. "What is this place?" I asked with agitation and fear mixed with confusion. He replied, "You see everyone seated in the field, all 12 of them. They were once in your shoes." "How do you mean?" I asked, looking at them. "They were all chosen, and when they arrived they were as confused as you were, not knowing how they ended up here, and not knowing how to leave, and all they wanted was answers. These answers only you can find for yourself. I'm only here as a guide. What does that mean? I'm saying the answers to your questions I don't have, only you can discover it. This doesn't make any sense, I said. It never does, you just need to let it play itself out. So how long would that take? It varies for every person. You see Guadalupe over there, she's been getting her answers in bits, and it's taken her whole life, but here she is enjoying every minute of the wait. So it's possible I stay here and never discover myself? He looked at me with piercing eyes, and said, everyone ends up becoming whole, under the Nagual. Nagual? I exclaimed. A step at a time, Pablo, you have a lot to learn, he whispered. And what if I don't want none of these tales you are preaching? What if I just want to walk back to my old life? He smiled and pointed straight ahead, saying, that's the gate over there. You wouldn't be the first to try and leave. But I can bet you'd find your way back here. I wasn't buying his story, I wasn't convinced. I had a plan before here, and if I ever going to find out what that all was, it'll have to be at the hotel, or from Fernando. Well, I'd take my chances, I said, and went into my room and changed into my old clothes, and made for the gate past Guadalupe, who gave me a don't do this look, but I was already out the gate. The night had settled and I had found my way out of the jungle. With every step it seemed I was going deeper. I had gone round and I paused as the fear of being lost dawned on me. My heart began to race as I heard footsteps behind. I turned around and it was pure darkness aside from the faint light from the crescent moon. It was total darkness. The footsteps came again, this time louder and closer. I immediately took to my heels and ran blindly through the bush as the person ran faster. I finally saw the silver glitter on the surface of the lake as I ran to a familiar memory. I made headway as I tripped and stumbled on the shore. I turned back and there was no one. I stayed there scanning around when I was grabbed from behind. I jerked and overturned the being as I came face to face with the striking beauty of Guadalupe. What on earth? I yelled as I got off her, why are you chasing me? Why are you even out here by this time? How did you get out? She stood to her feet and dusted herself. Firstly, I'm not chasing you, I'm keeping watch over you. Secondly, my first answer handled that already, and finally, I simply walked out the gate as you did. Except I did so against the maestro's orders. Who says I need your protection because I don't? And sorry if you disobeyed, but that's on you. I replied. She laughed and walked up to me. You do need my protection, you were lost already, and without me, you probably won't survive the night in this jungle. Remember the berries incident? As she said that, I felt a quick rush and dizziness, and I sat on the ground as the memories of the spider came back. What was that? I said, turning to her. You don't need my help, I should probably be headed back. She turned to leave and I ran to stop her. Okay, fine, I do need your help. Good, because there's no way I'm returning without you. I already flouted rules. I should as well get something worthy out of it. So I'm worthy? I asked, impressed and at the same time confused. Well, that's what my visions have been saying, she said. The moment I saw you, I knew you were him. I was him. Visions, what is all these about? I thought. She said, you need to return with me, only you can get the answers you seek. Here we go again, since I alone can get these answers, why then don't you let me get the answers myself in my way? By returning to the hotel or by asking Fernando? She said, smiling. How did you know that, Visions, too? She nodded with a smirk-toy question and scanned the horizon. It's getting late, we need to find a place to rest, it gets cold in the shore at night. We just had to climb uphill a bit and find a place to nest for the night. I lay staring at the darkness in the cold of the night, as my skin had formed goosebumps and I began to shiver and I could hear my teeth gently clatter. Hey, are you up? I asked. Yeah, the cold is making sleeping a huge task. Thought you'd know how to make a fire, I said, teasing. Well, maybe if I hadn't spent all that time explaining to you why you need to listen to me, maybe I'd have been able to start a fire. Well, at this rate we'd stay frozen if we don't keep warm, I said with a fainted smile. So what are you suggesting? We could come closer and use our body heat. She was silent for a while and she said okay. I paused and moved closer in the dark, as she moved her back to me and I wrapped my arm around her. We lay there in still silence aside from the chirping crickets and our breathing. It was dead silent. You seem tensed, I said, and she mutters under her breath. I didn't get that. What was that? Yes, she simply replied. Hope it has nothing to do with me. Well, it does in a way. I paused and slowly withdrew. I'm sorry, I didn't intend to make you feel uncomfortable, I said, completely withdrawn from her. She turned to face me and I struggled to catch her face in the faint moonlight. It's not entirely you, it's just that. She stopped and went silent. I'm listening, I said. Never mind, she blurted out. If you are not comfortable saying it, you really shouldn't. She said, it's just that in my 22 years of existence, this is the closest I've been with a man, and it just feels different. I felt my heart race as she said the words. I couldn't control it. I wasn't one to get jittery in situations as such, but this was different. Funny how we are both 22, was all I could say. Very funny, she replied, and there was an immediate awkwardness between us. We both stayed quiet and listened to each other's heartbeat, which seemed to have doubled in the past few seconds, and with words unsaid, in the darkness, we brought our lips to meet, as I felt the shiver run down my spine. She broke the kiss as she breathed heavily. I stayed still and let her decide. She pulled me closer and kissed me yet again, this time more passionately than before, as our tongues tangled, and our hands ran down our bodies. The cold had suddenly become inconsequential, as we took off our clothes in haste as the heat built within us and our desire grew. I felt myself throb intensely as my trousers came off, and she slowly set herself on top of me. She waist moving effortlessly over my groin, as she laid her soft chest on mine as we continued kissing. We let our exasperated sighs in our lust, as I craved to have her and let her have me, and then, she guided me slowly into her. I was indeed her first, as she let out an intense scream, grabbing my shoulders as I finally penetrated her. She settled from the pleasurable pain, and I turned her over as we began to make love under the faint moonlight. Minutes passed and it was nothing but pure bliss and ecstasy, as she moaned and groaned underneath me. Rather, she let out desperate sighs as she held on to my neck with her arms wrapped around, and her legs around my waist, clinging on for her dear life as she felt her climax arrive. In one last thrust, she let herself go as she struggled to catch her breath amidst the mind-blowing satisfaction from her first orgasm, as her legs shook desperately and I stayed put still inside her as I let her settled from her state of bliss. With no words uttered, we put our clothes back on and lay in an embrace, her back still to me, but this time she felt at ease, for she knew me, and I knew her.